So I'm working on a new project that's very exciting, and it's requiring me as primarily an orchestral film composer to really step outside of my comfort zone. This is a collaboration that I'm doing with longtime friend Dennis de Blasio, and if you haven't heard our first album that we put out a couple months ago called Circadian Rhythms, I highly recommend you go check that out. It's very cool. But this project is in no way, shape, or form related to that. It's a totally different concept that Dennis has cooked up in his mind. And it requires me to compose these big, long, extended passages of purely textural based music. So typically, as a film composer, we're very focused on melody and concepts like leitmotif. Not here. I've totally thrown melody out the window. It's not even a concern. I'm focusing entirely on timbre and texture, and to a much lesser extent, harmony. The way I'm accomplishing that is a little bit unique, and I think you're going to find it really interesting. Well, not that I know who you are, but if you're a young film composer, or you want to get into film composing, or you're a fan of film music, or you like ambient music or synthesis, or just music in general, I think you're going to find this interesting. You see, most composers for television and film, when we get jobs that require us to create just pads, we sort of laugh it off as an easy job because there are tools created specifically for that. Synthesizers like software synthesizers like Omnisphere, I use it all the time. In fact, I'm using it on this project. Omnisphere, though, makes it very easy to be lazy. There are a billion presets in there. All of them sound fantastic. You can choose any one, hold down a key for 15 minutes, and you're done. Now, like I said, I use Omnisphere all the time. I almost never use presets. Sometimes I start with a preset, but I always change them, because if I'm just using presets, then there's nothing to set my music apart from anybody else. And if somebody's paying me $10,000 to write a score for their film, and a high school student has the same tools that I do, and they could do it for $50, why is someone going to pay me to do that? So I always start from scratch when possible, and when I'm using a preset, I always change it. I have an idea in my head of what I want things to sound like, so I don't need the presets for inspiration. I already kind of have an idea of the texture and the timbre and the tone color that I'm looking for, and I have enough of the background information and kind of technical know-how to make that happen. So I kind of went off the deep end with this project because I was really hell-bent on creating something totally new and unique. Textures that nobody has ever heard before, textures that will exist for this specific album and can never exist for anything else. And the way I decided to do that was to utilize my modular synthesizer over here, which I've been building over the course of the past few years. I've really gotten into Euro-rack modular synthesis. So my idea was to create a patch where I could set it in motion and feed it lots of randomness, take the output, feed it back into the input, and all of these kinds of techniques to have it essentially compose on its own. And that's exactly what I did. So I patched it up, and the first time I did it, I let it run. Well, I was running the patch and just listening to it, and it was amazing. It was atmospheric. It sounded orchestral. It just kind of enveloped me with sound, but it was completely tonal because I had it tuned, and I have it kind of all the tones quantized to a very specific chord or scale or mode, really. I let it run overnight. I woke up in the morning, I went back, and it was still going, and it had morphed into something else. It's like raising a child. I woke up and it was something totally different. It sounded unique and like something I didn't even do. It took on a life of its own. It was amazing. So I loaded up Cubase and I just hit record, and I just let it go and recorded it for several hours, probably 6 or 7 hours worth of recording. And I went back and listened to the recordings, and man, this is really cool. It just goes on its own and composes music I've basically created a little monster here. So I'm going to take you over, all the way over there to my modular rack and show you very briefly how I set this up. Now I have to tell you, this is not a tutorial for those of you that might be already modular synthesis experts. Okay, this is really, I kind of want to explain to young film composers or even experienced seasoned film composers how you can incorporate synthesis into your acoustic works to create truly organic new atmospheres. So I'm not going to get into the technical nitty-gritty of how this patch works. I'm not going to explain all the settings on all of the modules that I have. It's going to be a basic overview so that composers can understand how you might be able to use this in your own projects. And I'll explain how I'm using it in mine. All right, so join me over there. Okay, this big spaghetti mess of wires is my small, little, meager modular synthesizer. These are all individual modules that are plugged in the back. They plug into what's called a CV bus. And you can see these wires in the front connect all the different modules. The brains of the operation here is this module here, which is called Marbles by Mutable Instruments. And this is basically a randomization module. It's a sampler that sends out random signals based on different types of algorithms. And it's sending random signals out to multiple modules. Now, the key to getting morphing textures that are constantly evolving is randomness. We must have lots and lots of randomness in order to have these evolving textures. Otherwise, what you get with something like Omnisphere or some kind of sample pack of textures is eventually you will hear the loop point. And it's like seeing behind the curtain at a magic show. You'll all of a sudden hear where that sample is looping, and it's no longer a magical texture. It's just a simple loop. Randomization will ensure that it's always different. It will never, ever, ever in a million years be the same. You mathematicians out there can double check my math on that one. This module here is my master clock. This module is actually generating sounds. As you can see, it says P-L-U-K. If you can see that, it's a pluck. It's generating a plucked sound. It's actually a modeled sample of a pluck, think of a violin pizzicato. All right. This is actually being controlled though by the Make Noise Rene sequencer. This is a Cartesian sequencer. Sequences move on an X, a Y, and a Z axis, and I have this, of course, being randomly controlled by marbles. So on the sequence, I have very simple fourths. I have B, E, and A. Okay, I wanted this chord to be slightly nebulous. I didn't want it to sound major or minor. I wanted it sort of in between, so I chose fourths. And which note it plays is going to be randomly generated, but also it's going to be random on the X, Y, and Z axis. Okay, maybe in another video I can explain. There's other videos that explain what the Cartesian sequencer does. Sound from braids from my oscillator are going through my Strymon magneto to add a really cool delay kind of stereo effect. So you're going to hear kind of like a ping pong going back and forth from the right to the left. And then sound from that is going into a simple bandpass filter to add some randomization with the filtering. Notice a theme with random. Random is key here. And then all of that goes through clouds, which is a granular synthesizer. It splits up audio signals into itty-bitty chunks and puts them back together in different orders. It's like Wonka Vision. Okay, it's going to put them back sometimes in the right order, most of the time in the wrong order, and each of those little tiny snippets are called grains, hence granular synthesis. So those grains are being put back in different orders, and they're being modulated in all kinds of different ways. So you get this really cool smeary effect that can also be pitch shifted. If you notice, you may not be able to see it, but I have pencil marks on this pitch knob. I actually used a tuner to find where the octave and the fifth and the fourth is, so I can actually kind of impeccably tune the grains that are coming out of clouds. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start my master clock, and once I do that, it's going to start sending control signals to Marbles, my random sampler, which is going to send signals along to Renee, my Cartesian synthesizer, Cartesian sequencer, which in turn will send signals to Braids, and you're going to hear that output. I took magneto and clouds out of the equation at the moment, so you can hear just the raw signal. It's going to be kind of boring and bland. You're going to wonder why I would ever want it to sound like this. So I'm going to start the clock. You can see the Cartesian synthesizer going through at least the X and the Y axis here. It's kind of hard to visualize the Z axis. Many of these steps have no notes assigned to it. Some do, some don't, and that's random. The ones that do are random, the ones that don't are random. Every time it lands on one that has a note, you can see whether it's going to trigger the E, the A, or the B, and it's going to send that up to Braids to be played. So at the moment, it's kind of boring. Let's add some all right, we're going to add some delay effects here. Magneto is synthesizing a tape delay. So there are like 4 tape heads, each of which are adding delays and echoes in very different ways. And I'm going to add some crinkle to the tape. And I'm going to add some flutter to the tape. It just makes it a little bit thicker. Okay, and now I'm going to add a little bit of spring reverb. Remember, it's random, so we might go 20 seconds without a noise at all. It's still a little bit harsh sounding, and I want this to sound more orchestral and lush. So to do that, I'm going to engage clouds. And now we're getting somewhere. And now, I'm just going to let this run for a while so you can hear the ambience that is going to be created. I'm going to add some sounds of a live orchestra, which I've ever so slightly and subtly detuned. And what I found is when I get these detuned orchestral instruments, even though I'm composing all of this without any melody whatsoever, the out-of-tuneness starts to make your brain hear melodies that aren't actually there. So what you're going to be hearing is my modular synthesizer mixed in with some textural, slightly detuned orchestra. Honestly, why would you want to use preset loops when you could have something like this. It started as voltages coming right out of the wall, going through a dozen or so different modules in my synthesizer, and coming out as a texture that will never be the same twice. Literally, when I stop this recording and stop the sequence on the synth, next time I start it, it'll never sound like this again. So if you want to hear more of this type of sound, stay tuned. Something big is coming. And if you're interested in learning more about how to make this kind of technique work in your setup, contact me. I'd love to chat.